Good evening. You're watching the series of interviews. Let's talk about future. I'm Mark Grigorian. My guest today is Alexander Iskandaryan, a political scientist and director of the Caucasus Institute. Let's start our conversation from the following. So, Armenia is now at a stage where changes are required. You may call them as you wish, a restart, a reformatting, doesn't matter. So, the important thing is the following. I want to know how these changes should take place and what has to be changed. Well, I may dig into my memory and try to remember countries that have never been defeated on front lines, but it wouldn't happen so fast. So if you look around, then there are many such countries. Georgia, for example, several times, by the way, suffered various severity, insult, uh, of defeat in Abkhazia and South Ossetia and civil war, etc. The same is for Azerbaijani society, starting 1994, until the latest times. Ukraine went through that and still goes through that. Moldova did another serious insult. Was for Russia everything that happened after the first and the second Chechen wars, so etc. The first thing I can say we should be doing, and by saying we, I mean Armenians in the whole world, the citizens of Armenia, those of Karabakh, I mean population. So they have to understand that it happens. It happens. I would but call it realization, rationalization, all types of discourses of what type of a state we are, where we're moving to, do we have future, how we'll live, and what happened in Karabakh. Well, I may say 200% of that, this is emotions, not realization, not rationalization. So we have to try to look at the world around us and understand we're not an island in the sea, and the waves of that sea do not uh, wash the shores of Ashotsk or Meri, to say so. So what happened here happened many times in different parts of the world in history. And the second, maybe more important, just in sequence of magnitude, not importance, is we have to work. We have to identify the problems the society faces and try to solve those problems, implement tasks. There's so many. That's building of the political system, building of the partisan system. It's the search for survival economically, meaning the development of the economy, up to culture and relations with the diaspora, relations with the neighbors, with the region, larger states, the understanding of who we are. We need intellectual work here. We need the work of specialists here. We need the work of every person in his or her place. So to realize, let me put it this way, and to complete the answer to your question, we should stop thinking that we can find the magic wand, that we can do something once, like the revolution in 1988, standing in the squares for half a year and get there, or win the war in 94 and then forget about it, or succeed in the revolution in 2018 and make a move towards democracy and forget about it. So there is no such a formula. universally applicable to everyone. We should understand that the nation building, right? The nation building, meaning the state building, it's easy to declare it, but in order to build it, you need generations. So I think that this is the important part, and that's what we have to do. Okay, so we have to work. Everyone has to be in his place, kind of, right? Doing his work diligently. So that's what it is. Well, sometimes that place is even missing. So sometimes there is a need for certain professions, specializations, or places in the society that did not exist before. Like after 1988, there were no politicians in the Republic of Armenia. There was no political science taught in the universities, but they had to emerge somehow after 1988, and they were made of raw materials existed at that time. Yeah, but we don't have politicians now either, do we? Well, people occupying the chairs of the politicians are the ones, people who grew up in these political realities. We may not criticize. Well, we may criticize and say that they are not the best and do not fit our expectations. By the way, our expectations are completely beyond any reality emotionally. I mean, this way or another, sometimes we have to be sure that we need things we did not have before. All right. So, just as a keyword, like what do we need to do? A keyword. I think one of such keywords is professionalism. I don't know. Roughly, doctors should do their jobs, politicians theirs, and cab drivers should be driving the cabs, and the industry and manufacturer specialists should be doing theirs. So, do we have the demand? Do we need them? Well, not well established instantly either. I mean, the politicians. When I said we don't have it yet, I meant political science, my professional activity. 1988, 1991, 92, we had the demand for the intellectuals, let me put it this way. So those, the Karabakh committee members, people who were coming to power, they were all doctors of science. They all knew many languages and had read many books, and they would come and invent the way of making it good for everyone. And then we had the demand for toughness. Well, we can attribute that to some names of presidents, but I do not that much mean Gogarian specifically. There were many such personas at the time. For masculinity, I mean, that was the demand for masculinity, for toughness, for machos. So, I mean, yeah, the masculinity that was formed on the front line, in the trenches, that they would do it. They will win. That was the time. That was the demand. Then there was demand for consensus. The complementarism, so called, so that we had to trade with anyone, try to fit into kind of Mikoyan's formula, right? You know, the story about Mikoyan. And then the demand for honesty came, independently for what they know, what they don't. They have to be honest. They're just honest. That's it. Fair. So every time there was disappointment. Every time. And I do not see yet the formation of the demand for competences. I would call it competences, though professionalism would also do. So I think it could be almost the most important thing, most surely, that has to be defined and established, the demand for the society to want that, for the society to want that people who do the management and make decisions ask whether the person, the highest on the land, is able to do the thing I'm voting for. Okay, so now we're failing on the point that we do not know what politicians we want, right? Kind of. Anyway, we need the savior of the nation. Part of our society understands that there won't be one arriving, and we have to think in different dimensions, apparently. So we understand that the demand for doctors, for example, we need competent professional doctors, naturally. And we understand that apparently we should learn wanting professional politicians as well, and journalists, and I don't know who else, political scientists, right? People or analysts, people who understand that there is political literature that has to be studied. Yeah, don't rub my wounds now, really. Well, joking, of course, but most of the people who speak of politics in the Armenian discourse, I mean, the television and newspapers, these are people who like to talk about politics, but they simply do not master the knowledge political scientists do. They don't know the technology, they don't know the principles, the postulates. They don't understand its science, like chemistry. They may not understand that. It's not required they do. But coming back to the point, the problem is much larger than that. In fact, if an average Armenian has a sick family member and that he has to take his wife for surgery, for example, he tries to understand, he tries to check out and see who's been good on doing that surgery and who's been bad with more lethal outcomes. For example, if there is a plumber required, he wouldn't call someone who knows Tumanyan by heart or knows English. He just calls the one who can do the plumbing. So, I mean, this is about certain sectors of life, but it's not about politics exactly. The general perception about politics as a professional sector or sphere of activity is missing. They don't understand that there have to be people working there, uh, have to be professionals. I may be mistaken. I should not definitely know which is the best doctor, but I have that setting in my head to find the one who is able to do his job. The first call that I had, no, maybe not the first one, was the voting for Rafi Hovhannisyan, with 37% voting for. 43% of the population of Yerevan, well, Yerevan is more in opposition than the rest of the country, in February, if I'm not mistaken. In May, in like literally 2.5 months from that, yes, it was February, March, and then beginning of May. You mean the elections, the May? Yes, there are 5 times less. So on those elections, my attention was drawn to a completely different fact. In those elections, I paid attention to the fact of how many people just did not vote or vote for no one. I mean, there was this agreement, right, that you can just write in something into the ballot and spoil and discard it. So that those spoilers essentially got 20,000 votes. People just spoiled 20,000 votes. Okay, I didn't even concentrate on those elections for. This was the person, Rafi Hovhannisyan was the person who was voted for. There were people who believed that this person would do the job of the president well. Well, that's the same now, isn't it? People who go against Pashinyan now and say that he's bad and it has to be reelected, etc., still is the same situation. In the Armenian discourse, it's called the denial. Before we denied Serge, deny Serge, that was the motto, and now they are denying Nico. So that's kind of removing the barrier. But if you remove the barrier, it cannot be a goal in itself, can it? It's just a means to do something else. You make a hole in the wall in order to put a window in it or stairs or a door or whatever. You just don't make a hole in the wall because that's the goal. You do it for something, right? And the goal is always removal, which is very typical for young democracies. Very typical, very characteristic. It's not a problem for Armenia. There are many countries who have that problem, but ours, unfortunately, as well. Okay, coming back to the question about the future. You know, for me, it is very important, and indeed it's important, to know the values we're building our future on. So I understand that today we have discussed several values our future is going to be based on. The future of Armenia, the future of Artsakh and Armenians in the world. So one of such values is labor, is the work. So we have to work, right? So we spoke of a different value, the professionalism. Professionalism has to become one. Well, it goes together, essentially. Work well, that's professionalism. There's another point. It's not just working well, but the society has to demand professionalism. Competences have to be demanded. So, to speak of the journalism, this is not the loyalty to certain political powers, but professionalism primarily has to prevail. So, what else? What other values does it make sense to worship, to put into the set of values we are building our future on? I would say responsibility. Responsibility, I would say, well, now, right now, like literally these months, I've been seeing many people who are not pleased, not satisfied with the current authorities. Well, provided I see people who are usually in my surrounding, these are usually persons with university education, good professionals who can do their jobs well, including journalists who write about politics as well. I know many of them, and not only. So different people who are qualified, who are good specialists, who are educated people. Anyway, a large number of people, I remember very well, supported Nikol Pashinyan. Well, I'm not saying that people should keep up to the ideals for all their lives, the ones that they had previously. So people change. Yes, people change. Their opinions change. I remember how that class of people who started to depart from my step political party that came with Nikol Pashinyan. I remember they were, first of all, complaining. They started complaining about the waste collection in Yerevan. They were not pleased with what the mayor did at the time because with the problem with the waste collection, there was garbage in the streets, and I was doing experiments. And they were saying like they're not collecting the waste. I would say, yeah, but it's you who fails to do it. Because you voted for that person, right? You did that. I was telling those people. And then it grew up into other problems. And now many of those who supported Pashinyan wholeheartedly previously uh, are with the same passion going against the authorities. I ask them sometimes. Sometimes it's not comfortable to discuss it, but sometimes I ask. I tell them, wait, but you complain. Okay, you blame him uh, for not doing certain things, but you're sure that the elections were not rigged. They say, yes, we're sure they were not rigged. But then what happened? They say, well, I was deceived. Yeah, but you are grown up, right? If you were deceived, then maybe you are also responsible for that. I don't see people feel their responsibility that way. Well, by the way, in that sense, in that light, the system of elections, I mean, deceived, cheated, etc., very often, very rarely, I'm sorry, people speak of the future during the election campaigns. They mostly vote for those who have the past, of the good past, because we do not believe in what they say when they say like they will make Armenia an economically stable or prosperous country. We just don't believe that. We just look at the person and think, yeah, but this man had 20 years of experience in political processes or in politics, and this one has 3 years, etc. That's why this one is better, or vice versa, the other is better. So it means, in fact, we have to learn thinking about future, including in the political light of that future. There has to be the political mind inclined towards or looking into the future. Moreover, I should say, we won't elect that person. We won't vote for him because we choose our happiness. That's what we vote for. So we're voting right now, like the parliament that we're having now. When lecturing in the West, in English, it's called the unknown parliament. So it's apparently the parliament, the members of which are the least known to the citizens of Armenia than any of the previous parliaments. So most of these parliamentarians are not known to our population. There was a whole list of MPs. If that list was 100% different, it would still be elected. Okay, then maybe a list of trust. Yes, full trust of credibility, not to the people who are in the parliament and write laws, but to the one who recommended those people, because he was blindly elected, and then he recommended those MPs, and they were also elected blindly. So let me remind you the phrase which I like a lot. When Churchill was elected in the beginning of the Second World War, when the British society and the Parliament, of course, had a very complicated attitude to Churchill and to the situation in the country, and it was all very ridiculous and sophisticated, but people understood there was no other way. They had to vote for the disgusting Churchill, as they said. And when he was elected, he read his famous speech that's called, just by the words he used, I cannot promise you anything but blood, sweat, and tears. That's what he said. Blood, sweat, and tears. So let's think. The person who stands up today and tells the Armenian people, I will not promise you anything but blood, sweat, and tears, will be elected for decades. But the one who says that the banks will not earn from credits and police officers will stop regulating the traffic and someone will be deprived of 50% and our opportunities would grow respectively, that person may be elected also. we may try living with that, but it's not easy. It's not short. Just as a child in a walker, right? When a child is put into this wheeled walkers and they are not able to walk in those for whole life, right? They have to be taken out of those and they will fall and have injuries and there will be big risks. But that child will have to, because there's no other way of learning to walk. So we have to learn to walk. Okay. So the next value, we called it responsibility. By the way, responsibility of the politician who says, I will build the prosperous and powerful Armenia for you, and the responsibility of every Armenian, or all of us, who would ultimately vote for that politician or someone else. However, there is another regularity. After a war lost, people either want instant retaliation, and then we may expect the rule of military. And apparently in Armenia, it's not the face when military rule may be established, or military dictatorship. So then what power should we talk about in Armenia? What type of authorities? In a country where there's no political system, let me even risk that. Well, I really hope that military dictatorship of some Egyptian scenario is not possible for many reasons. For the tradition of subordination of the armed forces to the political authorities, and ending up with the absence of the military class that used to grow in other countries and develop. I'm truly concerned, and I'm afraid. Well, speaking of wishes, right? So I'm really afraid that in Armenia for years, and now I'm departing from the image of a person who just sits and thinks to the image of a person who has the professional competence. So I'm really afraid that Armenia is doomed to the structure that occurred in the late Republicans. It is the weak authorities, weak opposition scenario, different interests in the power, in the ruling party that doesn't have the legitimacy, and the deteriorated and weak positions in the opposition. So it is possible, because we are a parliamentary republic formally, I mean by constitution, we are a parliamentary republic, and parliamentary republics work quite well in countries where there are developed political parties. We don't have developed political parties. Structures that are called political parties are not political parties, in fact. So my step is not a political party, it's a trade union. Opposition political parties, leftists, are just groups who gravitate around one person or one idea, and very often negative idea against the current authorities, etc. So it's very difficult to quickly develop political parties, by the way, independently from whether the authorities change or not, who the power belongs to. We'll still have to, in a situation when the same partisan system has to be yet elaborated, developed. In order to do that, there has to be a demand for that. I'm going back from my political chair to the next one and try to throw more extensive light on that. So what do we need? Well, I think, first of all, I'll risk saying this. We should move from the historical discourse into the geographic. The historical discourse is very popular in Armenia. It's the same thing happening now as it happened in 1920. we're just in the same conditions as we had in 1919, the beginning of the 20th century. So, I mean, these are historical illusions. They're very often lame because historical reality changes fundamentally, and externally events might look similar, but in core they differ. Well, there is a different discourse. We compare ourselves to Singapore, to Switzerland, to Germany. Yeah, great. We have to compare ourselves to Kyrgyzstan and Venezuela. Pay attention to what happens there in Venezuela specifically. You should compare yourselves to Moldova and to Macedonia and to Albania and to something that's been through phases or goes through such phases now, which are very similar to what happens in Armenia, or compared to countries who have been developing in a completely different manner. For example, I have the question, why not Tajikistan? We could. Why not Turkmenistan? Well, try to understand. Why not, really? Well, Turkmenistan, it's easy. They have oil and gas. Yes, you're right. Yeah, but not all. Norway also does have oil and gas, but it's not Turkmenistan and other oil and gas countries. So, in a nutshell, try to look around and understand, realize, reflect, and then say, it's hard. Well, I understand, but you should be honest in telling the people that this and this are going to come. And there are countries who have succeeded and those who have failed and those mediocre. So this is the discussion that there are no people to do that, but it's ridiculous, isn't it? No people in the country, but bring them from somewhere. If you need expert assessment and you need, I don't know, economic development program, okay, find someone, I don't know, pay $100,000 to someone to write it. If you need building armed forces, there are countries who've been through that, I mean, etc. So this is everything. And by the way, we're so proud of our military leaders, the formers and the currents. Well, we are, and they have deserved that attitude. All right. Unfortunately, our time is not unlimited. I'll try to wrap this up interim, and there are some questions on the internet, and I'm going to read them. So there are three, and they're quite concrete. All right. So values we should be paying attention to. Values around which the new perception of our reality should be built upon. According to a political scientist and director of Caucasus Institute, Alexander Iskandaryan, it's work, diligent labor, professionalism, responsibility, being rational, and being realistic. So a real look at our own selves, the surrounding world, the environment. So the question now, what are the best ways of bringing the West into the development of the situation in the Caucasus? Does it make sense, I would say? And if yes, then which are the best ways? Well, first of all, I would say that the West is quite significantly involved in the South Caucasus. But for example, the Far East or the Near East or Africa, they are not. We should start thinking about countries like Egypt, for example, which is not so far and is quite serious. India, definitely growing. China, a little bit. Japan, etc. So which are the ways of involving? In order to bring something to some other thing or involve to them to what happens in Armenia, we have to try to succeed somehow. Like the super nations, they're like the gods. They help the ones who help themselves. Well, I would say succeeding not in just inventing something incredibly important or doing something else, but also create the conducive conditions for such inventions, right? Yes, the creation of the conducive conditions for something is the success per se, isn't it? Doubtlessly, you're right. In order for them to be able to work with you. Some countries of the world, I will not name them, they are in different parts of the world. I mean, we would like to, but there is nothing else but just humanitarian aid that comes from them, and that's it. And even that doesn't work well. So there's nothing we can work with or around with them. But you have to understand your own way, and you can try to find the collaborators on that way. Okay, the next question. How do you see the future of Russian-Armenian relations? And may Russia leave the Caucasus, the Transcaucasia? Well, you have to divide that into time paradigms. Now, when you say now, it's years. So for years, I don't see any reasons for changing the relations. Russian and Armenian relations have to remain favorable. That's the world we live in. Well, it's just next to us. That's it. It's just so close, and it's of the size it is, and with all the sentiment that it has, Russia is a country with which was an empire. I cannot offer any other Russia to anyone else but the one that we have. Yes, our old neighbors are quite specific, and Iran and Turkey. So we have to understand that. In the future, possible, yeah. Well, I'm sure Russia will never leave South Caucasus. It's very close to it. But the fact that it will contract, it will shrink here, it already happens. Maybe Russia is one of the largest powers, is the largest power in the South Caucasus, but the one that shrinks. The influence of Russia on the South Caucasus, if you consider the last decade, shrinks rather than grows. Okay, I may put it this way in terms of Armenian-Russian relations, provided for us, very important value is our security. Yeah, security on personal level and communication level and state level and society and community levels. And provided we clearly link our security to cooperation with Russia, then I see the future in these relations, at least from our side, based on this, on that foundation. Well, that's how it is now. And for coming years, it will be that way. But the world will be changing in that sense as well. That's also sure. And we have to start thinking about that change now. But keeping good relations with Russia is a value, and we have to worship and nourish it. Okay. How do you see the relations in the future between Armenia and Artsakh? Is it going to be part of Armenia, one of the regions of Armenia, or an independent state, or what else? Well, it depends greatly on what Artsakh is going to look like and what Armenia is going to look like. So we're now at a tipping point where future development is going to come, and in case of Armenia, is not even the realization of a statehood, but the realization of the foundation that will help us moving towards the development of state institutions and institutionalization and politics and economics and security, etc. In case of Artsakh, the security will be guaranteed. And they will be able to find their security after the shock that persists in Armenia and in Artsakh now, so that we're able to overcome. And then we will try to understand how that may develop. This way or another, Artsakh and Armenia, they cannot be strange to one another, just by definition. So whether we are two separate states or one state, we will be visiting Artsakh as we visit our home. So what should I compare this with? Not even a French who visits Belgium, not even a French who visits a French-speaking part of Belgium. I do not know what other comparison to find. So we will be people visiting Artsakh as going home. So as their home. We cannot imagine that we are visiting Artsakh as we visit Latvia or Russia. I mean, it's not comparable. So this is truly being very close for us. All right, so we'll be visiting home, and how this is called administratively and politically and diplomatically is a different issue. Yes, it's an issue for the politics. Thank you very much. Our time's up. Our questions are over. And once again, my guest today is Alexander Iskandaryan, political scientist and director of the Caucasus Institute. Thank you and goodbye.